In Apex Legends, the meta is shifting constantly. When we first started, everyone only ran Wraith, Wattson, and Pathfinder for most of the first few years of the competitive scene, and a lot of just people playing in public lobbies too. But over time, the legend composition has completely changed, and now when you look at a tournament, it's Wraith, Bloodhound, Gibraltar, Horizon's making a come through. But one of the legends that has certainly been left in the dust has been Wattson. And in this video, I wanted to go over firstly how she rose to being in the top 2 or 3 legends in the entire game and being a staple of every single competitive team on the scene, to now having almost no place in the game, as well as where she could be going next as a character and how she could potentially rise again. So let's start with the Rise of Wattson. Wattson was first introduced in Apex Legends Season 2, and when she first came into the game, she was an instant hit for the competitive scene. Up until this point, zoning off areas on the map in Apex Legends wasn't really possible because Caustic was an extremely weak legend due to not having the fortified perk, meaning there was no real option for you to trap up an area. Rampart wasn't in the game, Caustic was weak, and Wattson wasn't there. Now, with the launch of Apex Legends Season 2, Wattson comes into the meta and completely transforms how competitive Apex Legends is played, because with her fences you can zone off entire buildings and areas, making it almost impossible for other teams to push you. The competitive scene at this point then became almost a game of chess, where teams had control of certain buildings and the zone would pull a certain way and you had to manage your rotations with Wraith portals. And this became the absolute staple of the scene because the pylon was unlimited in how long it could stay on the ground. You could place a Wattson pylon in a building and until the ring comes in, hold that building for the entirety of the game. And for those early competitive scene games, that was huge. Now, for public lobbies, Wattson wasn't really a big hit because the fences, they didn't really do much because everyone was constantly on the move. It only really mattered in high-level ranked and in those competitive scrims matches because you needed to zone off areas and you needed to gatekeep teams when there were large amount of players in a small congested area, whereas in public matches that just wasn't the case. Everyone was still really free moving, and because Octane was still a fairly new legend at the time, a lot of people were just running him because he was fun and fast and energetic, and Wattson's kit doesn't really appeal to a fast, energetic playstyle which public lobbies are. So Wattson never really succeeded there, but she was necessary on every single competitive team. You also have to remember there was no crypto in the game at this point, so when you set up your Wattson fences, the only way that they could really be destroyed is if a Caustic threw his ultimate onto your fences, which breaks them, or a gas barrel. But beside that, there was seemingly no way of breaking through a Wattson defense, and because of this, she was necessary in every single team composition. Now, we're fully aware that the fall of Wattson begins here because she reached her heights in Season 3 and she was still used in Season 4, but then beyond that, she was slowly on the decline. And there are many reasons for this, and there are a lot of direct reasons, but the ones I really want to focus on here are some of the indirect nerfs that she got over time that really played into this, that maybe go under the radar as well. So we'll start with the first nerf that she got, and this is an indirect nerf. So, the first nerf was grenades. Wattson's ultimate stops you from grenade spamming, and in the days before Wattson existed, you could stack grenades up. You could have 2 in each slot, and before Wattson that was a problem because people were just spamming end zones with grenades. Then in comes Wattson, and suddenly grenades are not as strong anymore because it can absorb all of those throwables, and the game still had 2 throwable grenade slots available, which meant people were running around with 4, 6 grenades at all times, and that was very, very common. Whereas today, since then, they have removed that ability to stack 2 grenades, and you can only store 1. So it's very interesting because nerfing grenades thereby nerfs Wattson's abilities, because if she can't hold, or all of the characters can't hold as many grenades, then her ability isn't getting as much use. It's not going to be actually intercepting as many ordnances because there's not grenades being thrown at her as often. You might waste 1 grenade, Now, a lot of people only carry 1, maybe 2 grenades on them, and if you throw it and it gets intercepted, that's it. And there's no more defending against grenades that you would have needed to do, whereas before, you may have needed to fend off 6 grenades or 8 grenades if 2 people are throwing grenades at you, which is a big difference, thereby making her ultimate less useful because you just don't need it as often, as people aren't running as many grenades as they used to. So that's the first nerf she got. And then in the Season 5 update, she got the 2 biggest nerfs, the 2 ones that most people will recognise as the reason she stopped becoming as strong of a legend. And the first one is that her pylon was no longer infinite. That was a huge nerf. And the reason why this was a big nerf is because you can't hold a room indefinitely now. You can hold it for 90 seconds, and then teams are free to push you after that. That was a big problem for Wattson. And the other big nerf that she got as well was that crypto EMPs now destroy her pylon. So the other sort of big indirect nerf that I didn't mention was in Season 3 when crypto was introduced and he could destroy Wattson setups with his drone, destroy all the fences. Now the old crypto in Season 3 and Season 4 and early Season 5 could only destroy the fences and not the pylons. And you also have to remember that that version of crypto didn't have all of the great scannability beacons that he now has in his kit. He couldn't pick up banners with his drone, so crypto was really weak when he first came out, meaning not a lot of people were running him, which meant that you could still play Wattson really successfully because there weren't really that much of a risk of you being EMP'd, whereas now crypto's a really strong character, and if you set up a complete Wattson setup now, crypto will just EMP it and you are basically an abilityless legend. And with Wattson's pylon being destroyed by it, 1 crypto EMP and you're in big trouble unless you're stacking ultimate accelerants, but they're not always easy to find. And that goes into my sort of next big nerf that Wattson sort of got, which was the maps coming in, and this is an indirect nerf. So on King's Canyon, there were those sort of little side buildings that you could find which had ultimate accelerants in them quite often, and they weren't really guaranteed, but they just always seemed to have ultimate accelerants in them all the time. And because the map was so much smaller, you could sort of travel and loot a little bit more, and I just felt like on King's Canyon it was easier to find ultimate accelerants than the 2 maps that have come since then. But that's not really the main reason that Wattson struggles on the newer maps. It's cover. King's Canyon was a tiny map, so in competitive King's Canyon it was really tough to control space because there wasn't a whole lot of it. So teams would have to coexist, one under a building, one on top of a building, one inside it, and you'd have to fence those areas up just so all 3 teams could coexist in that space together. In the newer maps, that's all changed because World's Edge is massive, and even though, you know, she was still very popular when World's Edge rotation started, the map is huge, and I'll get into a few reasons later why, even though she's now on World's Edge, was still good, it's now all changed again, and that will come with an update that happened in Apex Legends Season 7. But Olympus, especially in the casuals and when it first made it into its ranked rotation, she was basically useless because the map is really open, and in order to fence off an area, it doesn't really mean anything because you can control so much space by just being out in the open with a Gibraltar bubble. And this goes a long way because if you're out stuck in the open as Wattson, you're defenseless. Whereas the other defensive option you could be running in your setup is Gibraltar, who has that bubble, which has a lot of utility. It can give you 12 seconds of cover and decision-making time to make your way to a new space. But Wattson doesn't have any of that. You need to be set up in a building in some facet, whether it's above, below, in, on one floor of a building. You have to be inside somewhere, controlling a space, not an open space. You need cover of some sort to work with, and Gibby doesn't need that. And Olympus, it doesn't have that cover. It doesn't have the luxury of you being able to sit in a building all the time. You're going to have to do long, wide rotations across open space a lot more frequently. Think about the area near Turbine and Hammond Labs, and all of that open space around there is one of the toughest spots on the map to survive, and Wattson has almost no utility apart from fencing up the zip line. But then a Pathfinder can zip round it and she's immediately becoming useless again. So the maps themselves, the bigger they get and the more open they get, the less usable Wattson is. And with the new Kings Canyon update we're getting for Season 8, it's going to be huge. And I don't even think Kings Canyon will be anywhere near what it was like in the early seasons where she was really strong, where it was all compact, condensed, lots of buildings in really tight spaces that she thrived off in that environment. It's probably going to be a much more open map now because Apex is realizing that the game is more fair generally when the map is a little bit more open. World's Edge is the most balanced map for the competitive scene, and so I think they're going to go down the route of making Kings Canyon more like World's Edge, with more loot on the map and also having that great utility of space and punishing teams for being out in the open. Whereas on Kings Canyon, it was very easy to find your next bit of cover very quickly. And that's personally why Kings Canyon is my favourite map. I like the congestedness, the smallness of it. But I can understand that for a pro circuit game where Wattson's meant to thrive, why that doesn't work. And here's Wattson's biggest downfall. Every legend has a space in Apex Legends. You've got the casual public games, you've got ranked, and you've got competitive. And every legend fits in there somewhere. So Octane is great for public matches, okay for ranked, and terrible for competitive. Wraith is good all the way through all of them. Gibraltar's not that needed in public lobbies. He's good, but not as needed, but he's great in ranked and competitive. And every legend has their space. I think Lifeline is fantastic in ranked, terrible for competitive, and okay in public lobbies because you could occasionally be split from your team or you can't fully utilize her kit. And this is what the problem is with Wattson. She doesn't have a place. You see, the early days of Wattson, she was never good in public lobbies. She was okay in ranked and good in ranked too, and also very good in competitive. Whereas now there's only one competitive team I can think of in Flashpoint that I actually think run Wattson still consistently. Every team is ignoring her now in the competitive scene. She's largely being avoided in ranked as well, with a lot of teams sort of shocked when you see a Wattson there. I wouldn't see many teams running her in ranked seriously anymore. And in public lobbies, completely non-existent. I know very few Wattson mains, and all of them that I do know agree that she needs buffing in some way. But it's a tough legend to buff because she is in the top 5 win percentage. And that's because I think those numbers could be a little bit skewed for Wattson specifically. I think the win percentage and pick rate is very accurate for a lot of legends. But when one is picked as infrequently as Wattson now, because she's kind of the forgotten legend along with Rampart, you know, the stats don't really add up. And I think when it comes to those forgotten legends, Rampart and Wattson, I think are the two most underpicked legends in the game, I would say, just from my experience of playing. That I don't have any facts to support that. That's just from what I've observed playing the game. And with Rampart, I don't think good players tend to, and this doesn't rule out them being able to, because there are a couple of really good Rampart players, but they don't tend to play Rampart because of how new she is, and her kit being kind of weird, and her ultimate being quite useless. Whereas I think there are good Wattson players, and a lot of players who held on to Wattson from the early seasons, which is why her win rate is still quite high. And in end zones, her utility can be very, very powerful, especially if you're getting to those end zones consistently. And also, if you're just a good player playing on Wattson, you can just get kills without needing to utilize your kit. So I think it's a little bit skewed for Wattson having her win rate be so high, because I don't necessarily think it reflects her usage at the minute. She's not being used much. Now, in Apex Legends Season 7, one update did happen, which I think has flown under the radar as one of the biggest nerfs to Wattson in the modern time. And that is, they removed Ring 7 and instead replaced it with a slowly creeping Ring 6. They also increased the size of Ring 5. And what all of this means is that end zones are bigger and moving. And why that impacts Wattson is because, like we said earlier in the video, she thrives off of small spaces that you need to compact your team into and control a lot of. And with Ring 5 being bigger, that more teams can coexist without the need for Wattson fences. You can coexist with no cover at all. Whereas before, because the space was so limited, you had to coexist with other teams or fight them, but you could only coexist if you had Wattson fences, because you only sometimes had one wall between you and another team, and fencing up both sides was good. But with Ring 5 being so much bigger now, you can coexist without that need. And with no Ring 7 anymore, and instead of slow moving Ring 6, there's no point to the Wattson pylon, because you're not defending a spot right till the death. What made Wattson so strong in the end zone was that you could run all the way up to the tail end of Ring 6, start of Ring 7, defending with a Wattson pylon. Whereas now, once the moment Ring 6 kicks in, you need to be worrying, because the zone's going to be pulling, and in those high competitive games there can sometimes be 4 teams left, and Wattson's useless, because once that ring starts closing and pulling in, you can't put the pylon down anywhere, because you have to move in a couple of seconds time anyway. And those seconds, when there's only 4 teams left in Ring 6, are everything. And in older competitive games, Wattson's kit would have been vital to making sure that teams weren't pushing you and you could control your spot. But now with the ring moving, there's just no way, because you're all constantly on the move at the same time. And this really does make Gibraltar a big perk, because he can put down the bubble which creates cover, and that bubble can be placed anywhere you need it. And even though it's also static, it takes up so much room that you can throw it a little bit ahead of where you need to be. And with the slow ring moving in, you have 12 seconds of cover in that slow ring. Whereas Wattson's pylon is just not going to be utilized in the same way. It's got no cover. And a lot of these zones are ending in quite open spaces. So I think her trophy and her ultimate, her fences, are even more useless there, because of everyone sort of rushing towards end zones. Because if you can get down fences in those end zones, that's fantastic. But a lot of teams are running caustics, and like I mentioned earlier, one caustic ultimate or a set of barrels into your fences and it destroys them, which means that those end zones are dominated by caustics now. And if a team with a caustic makes it to the end, Wattson is out of abilities that can really make a difference. And I think in combination with all of these things, she has become a much less required legend for team compositions. Other legends have received significant buffs that have made them really good. And I think overall, Apex is in one of the most balanced spots for legend meta ever. The only legends that need big tweaks for me are Wattson and Rampart. All the others, I think, are doing quite well. Potentially Revenant might need something as well in the future, maybe a slight change, but the weapons and the legend balance is extremely strong right now in Season 7 going into Season 8. But Wattson is being forgotten, and that's why. So the reason I made this video is to bring you aware of the indirect buffs, mainly, because those indirect buffs they all go under the radar, and people see the big changes that happen with her pylon and think that that is the only reason, but there's actually so many things that have gone in to why she's not being picked anymore. Now, some reasons and things that could change her. The devs have been known to say that changing a character's hitbox size does sometimes directly correlate to their pick rate and win rate changes. So one potential way that they could make Wattson more appealing in public lobbies is by giving her the smallest hitbox in the game. She's got low profile anyway, and she's naturally quite a small character. So why not make her a defensive legend that is hard to hit? Because all the other defensive legends are easy to hit. Caustic and Gibby have that big hitbox, and Rampart sort of runs weird because of how her turret hangs behind her, and it sort of makes her a bigger target with the turret. So she's quite a weird character to shoot at, and I can think quite a bit easier to hit than a Wattson. And I think if they made her hitbox a bit smaller, that might make her more interesting. I've seen some really cool ideas where people have suggested having her fences be invisible until someone steps into them, and then they come on and activate, and so it stuns you there and hits you for that 15 damage. But I don't really know where to go with Wattson next, but change is definitely needed. Now let's bring into consideration a couple of the buffs she's got. We've talked about in her fall how she had so much taken away from her, and how the buffs that she got didn't make much of a difference. She only got 2. So back when Wattson first came out, she could place 3 pylons down at any one time in any spot. This wasn't that useful because, again, you were trying to hold a small area. That was then removed, but it was brought back when her pylon was nerfed so that it disappeared after 90 seconds. But then again, no one would use it because in order to have 3 pylons up within 90 seconds, she would have to use ultimate accelerants to get them, and it's so situational. You would need 3 ultimate accelerants, and you would need to be in 3 different positions you need to hold with Wattson generators, but then by the time you've placed the 3rd one down, the 1st is about to go, so it's impossible to manage. It's like spinning plates. You can't control all of that in one go, so it's basically a buff that meant nothing. She got a buff where she could stack 2 ultimate accelerants. I really like that. I think that should stay. That was a good buff. And she got a buff in Season 7 where her fences now do 15 damage instead of 10. It made a change, but not massively. I've played a couple of really cool Wattson games where someone's taking the zipline into some of my fences and it has crippled a team. And in fact, one of the last videos I posted on this channel was a Wattson squad wipe, or double squad wipe, that I did using that technique. And I genuinely don't think I would have got that squad wipe if I didn't have the fences like that. So go back on the channel and check that out for sure. But I think more is needed. I'd love to know in the comments what you think of Wattson. Do you think she needs some buffs? Do you think we need a meta shift, or are you enjoying Apex where it is right now? I would like to see the competitive scene personally go more back to how it used to be played in Season 3, on Season 2, on King's Canyon and early World's Edge with the Wattson setups with Pathfinders and Wraiths. I think it was more of a methodical game back then, whereas now with all the different meta compositions it's quite hectic. But then again, I do love seeing different legends being used in the competitive scene, so I'm not sure where to stand on it, and I don't know what the answer is, but what I'm here to do is to open that conversation with you, and I'd love to hear what you think in the comments below. I love making these kind of commentary videos. I know it's been a while, so thank you all so much for joining me. My Loba video has done amazingly well. Thank you all so much for the support on that. A few months ago, I made a video about Loba and some buffs that I had for her, and that went down a treat, and I think a lot of those haven't been implemented into Loba's kit. So I definitely recommend going back to watching that if you think any of those changes could be integrated into Loba, and leave us some support over there. I really appreciate you watching along with me today. Thanks again, everyone. I hope to do some more commentary videos in the future for Apex Legends. I know I've been away for a little while, but I've now got a new PC set up. I'm sort of doing this sort of me bit at the end, so you know, feel free to click off if you're just here for the Wattson content. But if you're here for me as well, I've got a new PC set up, and so I'm hoping to be able to put out some more Apex Legends videos, as I've been loving the new season. Very excited for Fuse coming in just a couple of days now. I mean, well, it's we're a week and a day away from Fuse, so it's really exciting times. Can't wait to see the gameplay trailer, and I'll see you all so soon.